Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to bring this webinar to you. Feel free to use the chat to say hello and let us know where you're signing in from. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen share ready. We have a lot to cover today. We're really excited about this. But first, some housekeeping. Okay. All right. So thanks for joining this webinar, How We Document Deep Dives, Hot Takes, and Q&A with me, Michelle Chin, and our friend Dan Mall. Before we get started, a couple things. If you haven't had a chance to see the report yet, definitely download it. You can use this QR code to get the report. I will also send the report link in the chat. So yeah, consider checking that out if you haven't already. We definitely also have a Slack channel where you can sign up and talk with the community. We can talk about the webinar later on as well. If you need assistance, reach out to Connie or Jules in the chat and they can help you. Definitely talk to Jules first. We are recording this webinar, so we will email you later when we have the recording available. If you need captioning, unfortunately Demio doesn't offer captioning, but what you can do is use webcaptioner.com. It's a free tool. You just have to unplug your headset so your computer can hear, and then it will translate for you. Let's see, so send this link now for web captioner if you need it. If you have any questions, there is a little handout in the handout panel along the top right for troubleshooting, but you can always ask Jules. And then lastly, we just ask you not to be a jerk. And I think for the most part, this, we're all friends here, so it's all good. Okay. Moving along, wanted to announce that Zero Height has Converge 2023 happening in the US. It's on May 18th in person in San Francisco. We're really excited to be meeting in person and meeting the local community. So definitely if you can fly out to San Francisco or visit, check out this conference. We have an amazing panel of speakers. And for joining this webinar, as a thank you, we are offering 20% off. So HWD 20 gets you 20% off, which means the ticket is only $60, which is quite a steal. If you ask me for this amazing lineup, last year Dan Mall spoke at our inaugural Converge conference in London. And yeah, we have a lot of other speakers. Okay, let's see. So kicking things off, we have our speakers. Me, I'm a design advocate at Zero Height, and you can follow me at Soy Sauce Chin on Twitter. And then we have Dan Mall, founder of Design System University. You can follow him on Twitter at Dan Mall. So let's go ahead and let's do some quick introductions. Dan, feel free to introduce yourself to our audience.
Cool. Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Mall. As Michelle said, I'm the founder of Design System University. I can tell you a little bit about that. Before that, I ran an agency for about a decade called Super Friendly, and Super Friendly works with all sorts of different clients with their design systems and helping in-house teams establish and grow a design system practice. So I since shut that down about 6 months ago and have been focusing on teaching in-house teams and people on in-house teams how to grow their design systems on their own so they don't have to rely on external parties or partners to be able to do that, because design systems are becoming more and more important in terms of creating digital things. So I started Design System University to help people grow in that field in lots of different ways. There's going to be courses and content and all sorts of things like that launching very, very soon. So sign up for that if that's something you're interested in.
Awesome. I can't wait to see Design System University take off. I'm pretty excited about it. So yeah, like today we're going to talk about the How We Document report. If you weren't familiar, Dan had done a video where he kind of goes through the report and gives his feedback on it, asks some questions, and I thought it'd be really cool to invite Dan so he and I can have a conversation about the How We Document report. I was the design advocate that led a lot of the analysis and the survey itself. So happy to provide more context, answer questions. He and I are going to dive into some hot takes about what we think about things, and then definitely ask questions in the chat. And the second half of this webinar, we will answer some of your questions about some of the findings in how we document or other random questions related to the report. But yeah, so let's get started.
Oh, can I start with the first question for you? Do you mind
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah, sure.
As the design advocate leading this stuff, what was it that made you and the Zero Height team decide to even do this research that led to this report? Like, what were some of the impetuses? I don't know what the plural of impetus is. Impeti? I don't know.
Yeah.
What was some of the motivation that led to creating this report in the first place?
Yeah, so Luke had done the first report last year, the year before, just to get a good sense of like where design system documentation is. Since Zero Height is a documentation tool company, we were looking at like kind of what the landscape was. We got like a lot of good feedback on the original survey, so we decided to make it an annual one just to kind of see, what's been going on with our world, especially because the design system field changes so frequently. It evolves, there's different trends. Even if we're coming up across like it's been like 10 years since atomic design was identified or established. So like a lot has come in those like 10 years. So we want to take a look at to see where the landscape has changed. And also provide some feedback for people. We know people have a hard time getting buy-in for design systems in general, tools, that type of thing as well. So having a document that kind of helps support the community is something that we were interested in doing as well.
Th- that's why I wanted to do a video about this, and that's why I'm glad we're doing this webinar. Is like, as reports like this come out, as data like this comes out, I nerd out about this kind of stuff because I think it helps everybody. So I was like, let me just go page by page and see what I can learn through this, and I might as well do that in public, that hopefully other people can learn from too. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's just a good way to just have like a more open conversation about things, get people involved, and however we can help the community, like more power to supporting them. Um, all right. So if you're not familiar with the How We Document report, we had over 500 people participate in the survey. We opened it up to anyone who was familiar with design systems, whether they worked on them or not. And then there's like 5 different sections around who took the survey, the organization, design system team makeup, design systems with documentation, and happiness. So um, wanted to jump into some like easy stuff at first. Let's see. Um, I guess let's talk about job titles. Um, is there anything that surprised you here with job titles?
Not necessarily surprised, but at a macro scale, at sort of a micro scale. But this in combination with, I think it's the next slide also with the design system job titles. One of the questions that I get a lot in my courses and my webinars and stuff like that is people always ask me what the job market looks like for design systems, right? Because they're like, a lot of them have jobs in product design or in engineering or in product. But they don't see a lot of things in design systems. Now, my echo chamber on LinkedIn and Twitter, I see a ton of them. And so I think that stuff is like in the echo chamber, but it's not necessarily publicized. And so this was something that I don't remember if this was in last year's report, explicit slide about job titles, design system job titles, but just seeing all of these listed, it now gives me a place to point people to go like, look at all the titles, look at all the jobs that people have in design systems where people have official design system titles, with the phrase design system in their job description. And I think that's been really encouraging to a lot of people. So it wasn't necessarily surprising to me that this has happened. What was surprising to me is just like, there's a slide of it now, there's something to point people to that says like, look, you can get a job in design systems where design system is an explicit part of your job. And your responsibility. It's not just, because I think in the previous years, it's been like design system is like one of the side things that I do in addition to my typical product design job or senior designer job or whatever that is. Now people are dedicated at least part-time, if not full-time, to design system roles. So I loved having this here. I didn't expect to see this. So in that sense, it was like surprising to see it all listed here. And also, I didn't know that there were that there were this many, so even just seeing like, oh, there's more than two there's dozens here on this slide. That I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it was pretty surprising to me too, because I think as a designer and working on design systems, you're just like, am I going to be pigeonholing myself into a very, very specific career in design? And will I never be able to do like regular design again? And I think this speaks volumes to the amount of potential you have as a design system um, maker, in terms of your career and where it can go. So this was pretty exciting to see. I think definitely, this is the thing, you can search for design system jobs on LinkedIn and you can find actual titles. So definitely very exciting. Um,
About all the people who are attending this too. If you would put in the chat if you have a job in design systems, or if your title has the word design system in it, I would love for you to post that in the chat too, just so we can see like even people attending this, like there are jobs in design systems. So yeah, thanks for those who are already posting that in the chat.
awesome. Yeah. All right. Let's see. I think a couple other things in terms of what I thought was interesting is that like age doesn't equate to design system experience. So, regardless of people's age, most people and even work experience only had 1 to 3 years of design system experience. Um, so I think this was good to see that. Like I think even though design systems feel like they've been around for a long time, a lot of people are still new to the experience. So um, definitely don't think it's too late for anyone to join.
What's really exciting about the field of design, like I don't know if it's a field, yet. I don't if is it big enough, but like that's to me what's so exciting about design systems right now. Like it is a great time for anyone to get on board, because I think it's later in the report too that age doesn't equate to design system experience, neither does experience doesn't relate to design system experience. So I think it's the next slide, or one of the future slides, one of the slides after that, like even people who have been doing design or engineering or product for 20 years are like, yeah, I've done design systems for like a year or 2 or 5. So no one is that much ahead. And I think that might be the case. That may change later, 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, where, as a newbie, you're 20 years behind someone who has 20 years of design system experience. But right now, even though the design systems as an idea have been around since the start of graphic design systems in digital are such a new field. Like you said, atomic design is 10 years old. So at most, you're 10 years behind someone, but even that feels like, most people only have a few years of experience in design. So I think getting in on the ground floor of design systems, it's a really exciting time for that now.
Yeah, for sure. Um, all right, let's jump. So we added some demographic questions to this survey this year, which is different from last year, and that was partially in terms of just pure interest, is to see like how the breakdown of our demographic population was within design system community. So I thought this was interesting. Like women are well represented compared to other tech industries or in the tech industry as a whole. So people who responded to the survey, 41% identified as female versus 26% of the workforce in tech only accounts for women. So that was really cool. I think that kind of mirrors the people that I talk to on a daily basis. And yeah, I guess like, did anything surprise you there, Dan?
I enjoyed seeing that. What like I'm curious about why that's the case, and I'd be curious if you have any speculations or data or anything like that that indicates that. I'm curious about why. My hypothesis is because design systems is such a newer field compared to other fields that exist. I wonder if we had the chance to establish that system from the start, right? The idea that we want better representation in this industry. It's not like we're fighting, decades and decades of like, well, it's very male centric or very, it's one race or another. That we had the chance to sort of design that from the start in the roles that we talk about with design systems, in the fact that other fields um, that have more of a majority of women and people who identify as female, like design ops, like writing, things like that, have more of a central role in design systems, even though not as large as I'd like to see that. I wonder if that's the case, but I don't know. Do you have any speculations or hunches as to why that is?
Do you want my hot take?
Please go for it.
Yeah. Okay, so I think like what's interesting is so I guess I don't have the actual statistics, but maybe I'll have to pull this up later. But a lot of times like with volunteer and mentorship efforts, a lot of the people who do the volunteer to help are women. Um And so I think a lot of times when there is a design system that can't be resourced properly, but we all know that it needs to be made, maybe women are stepping up to volunteer and say like, we really need to get this done. So we're gonna make it happen. That's a hot take there.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense to me. Can we dive deeper into that? Can I ask you a couple questions about that?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have a judgment call about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or is it a neutral fact to you?
I mean, I think getting representation is really important within a design system. Um, I don't see it as like, you know, men are going, hey, let's just let the women do this work, right? Like it's not like that, but I think women might be more inclined to step up, but I think it's good to have that representation. Um,
Gotcha. So the reason that I asked that is, I'll admit it's a little bit of a leading question. The reason that I asked that is because oftentimes in volunteer situations, there's a lot of inequity there, right? Where the people who are generally underrepresented or people who already have a lot of burden on themselves find themselves taking on more burden to get something that they want, like a design system. So, that's partly why I'm asking that is like, is it the people who are like, well, I'm already under resourced or I'm already understaffed, and yet I have to volunteer for even more stuff to take on to have something that's good because we can't get the buy-in, because we can't get the resourcing, because we can't get any of those things? Like, how, if that's a bad thing, how do we change that? And if it's a good thing, then how do we make that persist? But that's partly what I was curious about, if you have a take on.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that makes total sense. I think like I can speak from my personal experience. Like I was the, oh, I'm definitely busy, but like this needs to get done. So let me figure out a way to then also take on this design system work at the company I was at. Um, but definitely, had help, but it was yeah, it was one of those things that you're just like, I need to get this done. And you feel like, some obligation to do it for the greater good. But that can also lead to burnout. So that's also not good. Um,
With that a lot when I work with teams is like a lot of times what they want is they want their boss or their boss's boss or their manager or something to give them the blessing and the space to be able to take on design system work. And oftentimes as a consultant or as an advisor, I'm saying to them like, but what are you going to do if you don't get that blessing? Like, what are you going to do if your boss says like, we just don't have extra budget, we don't have resources, we don't have, all these things, and you got to get this done anyway? And a lot of times what I end up saying is like, well, we got to do this under the radar, if we're going to do it. And the general sentiment on that, which I understand, is like, ugh, like, on top of everything else I have to do, like, all right, yeah, I got to do this too. And so yeah, I totally agree with you that a lot of the sentiment is, well, this is going to benefit everybody. So I'll make the investment, or a small group of us will make the investment. But I think a lot of people are a bit disgruntled about that, or like not thrilled about that.
for sure. And I think the other thing is like if you can demonstrate that you've done this as a side project behind the scenes in addition to extra work, I feel like a lot of other stakeholders are like, well, I didn't give you resources and you still managed to create it. So why should I give you additional resources in the future? Because you'll just make it anyway, right? So I think there is definitely like a push pull there in terms of managing expectations and understanding what you're taking, and also being able to put your foot down and saying like we will not work on this, and we will like live the pain points until we get resourcing.
That's
um,
such a hard balance to strike.
It is. It really is. And I feel like that could be definitely a talk topic for another time. Um, I think the one thing that I want to point out about the demographics is that in the survey, like ethnic identity, it isn't very diverse. So it seems like 62% identify as white or European, and then everyone else is like the other third. Um, and wanted to touch base and see if you had any thoughts about this as well.
Of mixed thoughts about this. Generally, as a brown person, I like to see representation. I like to see more people of color, and more women and more folks that are generally underrepresented in our industry, and specifically in design systems and design and products, um, have more of a role. So on one sense, I'm like, well, this sucks. 62%, more than half. It's the data is skewed. Not the data. The facts are skewed, right? Sorry, I'm saying that poorly. the we have an imbalance there. On the other hand, I'm like, it's actually better than other fields. So like, good for us, I guess, thumbs up a little bit. Where like, if I look at design, I don't have the data in front of me, but as I look at design as a whole, if I remember from like, AIGA surveys or things like that, I think it's like 70% of people identify as white or European. So it's like 62% is better than 70%. It leads to more, it leads to more representation and more of a balance. And that's closer to, if these are US centric, that's actually better than, like closer representation to the US population. About 62, 65%, are white or European. So I'm like, this is good. I think it's trending in a better direction than some of our adjacent fields. But it doesn't feel like it's representative overall, especially, as you look at that 6% Asian, 6% Hispanics, 4% South American, 2% Indian. Like those don't feel representative of all the people in tech. And especially if you compare it to the engineering side as well, I think engineering trends a lot higher in terms of Asian, South Indian, things like that. So I would love to see more representation here. I'm not sure how we do it other than by making sure that people are visible, or that's one of the things, making sure that people are visible in that space so that others like them can say, like, I can hold those kinds of positions.
Yeah, for sure. And I've pulled up the Stack Overflow developer survey. So this is out of like a really large pool of almost 70,000 people where a majority identify as white or European. So that's definitely higher than how the How We Document report results were, but it's still pretty reflective. And I think what I find interesting is that, so I couldn't find like a statistic or data around like the same way they broke, like we have ethnicity broke down from like the Stack Overflow survey and from the How We Document survey, but like I got this like data, this is from the UN, like the data population pyramid pulled it from UN data around kind of like population based on country size. And I know this doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one to ethnicity. Um, but like I think this is really interesting that like a big group of the world's population is in Asia, but not yet represented in the same numbers as our design system survey. Same thing with like, if you're thinking about like Europe, it's a very small piece, but like they have much more of representation within the design system community. So I think that's interesting because it's not necessarily like it's definitely not like a one-to-one reflection, but something to point out, because I do wonder, if we're skewing this way in terms of population, that means, we're thinking in terms of like the majority of these people's perspectives, like what other perspectives are we missing when it comes to design systems? And because design systems are so foundational to products, like are we missing anything like culturally from not having other people represented at the table? Um,
I think I'm glad that you bring that up because I think that is the reason that we're talking about representation and why that's important. Um, to me, I think it's very prevalent right now in AI, in what's happening with AI. In the last 6 months or so, AI has has exploded in popularity, and we're seeing a lot. And for the last few years, we've been seeing a lot of the dangers of the lack of representation in how AI is trained, right? And I think, like as an example, um, AI bots trend a certain way based on the training data and based on the people that are creating it. And when the training data skews and is non-representative, we see lots of dangerous things happening. We see bots becoming dangerous. We see bots becoming threatening. We see bots becoming, skewing a particular way. And I think to me, that's why it's really important in terms of design systems is that we're not just creating products, we're actually creating the systems that create those products. So we're potentially creating something that is longer lasting, I think, than just the products themselves, which I think is more short-lived. But we're creating things that are designed to last and designed to actually power the things that we're making. So to me, the responsibility there is a lot more dangerous to, if we don't have the proper representation. Because what this data says to me is whatever we make with our design systems is going to represent the same way that data manifests. So it's going to do things that benefit 32% of white folks and 30% of European folks and 6% Asian folks and 4% South American folks. And I think that like that's the way that it's going to trend unless we change something about that. Now, like maybe a topic for another time is, should we change something about that? But right now, just from a factual perspective, just looking at that, that's what I can expect as an outcome. Is that the inputs into design systems will probably reflect the outputs of those design systems too. So I think for me, that's why the representation is so important. And I love, Courtney's putting in the chat, like, we make our tools and our tools make us. That whole idea, I think, is so important. So we are right now at the stage where we are making these tools, and we're fairly immature in that. The tooling is fairly immature, and only in the last couple of years has that become more mature. But as that progresses, I think we're going to see that responsibility, and hopefully it's not going to be too late to recognize what potential outcomes we're actually creating and whether we intend those in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like I maybe at some point we can dive deeper into this topic and see like what things can be done to make representation stronger from other people, and see if we go there, because I think a lot of times it's hard to figure out like what are some things that we can do, for sure. But let's keep moving because like I think time is cruising by pretty quickly.
Great. Yep.
So
Let's do it.
wanted to, I think in the video you had mentioned, so design team size. Um, in our survey, most organizations had design teams from 4 to 9 people. And I think, for design systems with over 10 or more people, you'd be interested in hearing more about that because I think you had some opinions on larger design system teams.
A lot of them come from my opinions about large teams in general. So, my bias definitely affects all of this. My bias is like, when I think of a team of 10 or more people, I'm like, that seems like a tough team to run, no matter what they're making, right? A design system, a product, whatever that is, because I think it's not just about the product or about the team size or the amount of capacity that they have, but I think that you run into communication challenges outside of that, right? Like, larger than 10 people, I'm like, I think that I know there are lots of startups that have, I think it came from Facebook, maybe the like 2 pizza rule,
Yeah.
and of course it depends how much pizza one person can eat, because I could throw down a whole pie by myself sometimes. So, that said, like, I think design system team size for me, 4 to 9 people is a sweet spot. So like, I'm really encouraged to see that, because I think that's the size of a good cross-disciplinary team that is able to work on a thing together. I think more than 10 people is like, how are you working on one thing together? You're probably working on lots of things, but now you have to coordinate lots of things. So that's why I'm curious to hear from teams. Like, I've worked with just a few teams that are like, we have a design system team of 30 people or 60 people. And what I hear from those teams, even though it's a small sample size, is like, they're also like, we have too much to do. So like, at some point, the amount of people on a team does not equate to we can do more. It just equates to like, we have to manage more. So anyway, I don't have a lot of data on that myself. So I would love to hear from more teams that are like, in our 60-person design system team, here's how we break down our roles, or here's how we break down our responsibilities. Here's how we communicate. Here's how we effectively do what we're trying to do.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think you're right. Like it does. Like as someone, I worked at an enterprise company, so our design system team, granted, we were not all dedicated to it, but there was like 16 of us. So like trying to coordinate 16 of us in different time zones was really, really challenging. But I think that was also the reality. Like we wanted to make sure we had good product representation, so we couldn't get away with not having all those people in the team. But it was definitely a little unwieldy. But I think it is the reality for some companies, especially like we found that 8% of teams have over 20 people. But I think it would be kind of interesting to kind of learn more of like what works for them
Yes.
and what works at that unwieldy size. Because for me, I couldn't get away with having a smaller team, without not getting that representation across our product portfolio.
I think
Um,
one of the reasons that this is important is, I think the dream of design systems, like you talked about before, is always more resources, right? Like, okay, it's 1 or 2 of us that are doing this under the radar, but one day in the future, our promised land is going to be, we have resources, right? We have more people to do more things. But at some point, isn't there a limit there? At some point you're like, okay, we've reached it, and then and then past that is actually too much. So I'm curious where that point is, and I wonder if anybody looks at a slide like this and goes, oh, we only have 49 people right now, but one day we'll have 16, or one day we'll have 35, or one day we'll have 75, um, and I think that might be a misleading dream, right? That might be a dream that like you actually don't get the things that you want, with 75 people on a design system team, So is there a sweet spot there? So all to say, I like where this is trending, that the majority, 40% of teams surveyed here have about 4 to 9 people. I wonder how that will trend in the future, in next year's report.
Yeah, like I'm interested in seeing like what's the cap out, like because I think in this slide here, we do have like a design system team size increases with the company size, and this just to clarify is like not dedicated, was just like anyone working on design systems. So obviously, if you are a smaller company from 0 to 10 people and there's 6 people on working on design system, it's kind of like more of an all hands on deck approach. Like not everyone's dedicated to it, but we're all pitching in. So that number kind of, shrinks a little bit, but then also grows fairly steadily. And then when you have like a bigger company, there's definitely a lot more. But like at what point, is like the magic number, the magic cutoff line at that size. So definitely interesting to
For
see.
me, oh, sorry to cut you off.
Oh, go ahead.
This is one slide for me that the numbers in the report actually were not a match for what I've seen anecdotally. And of course, my sample size is a lot smaller. But what I've seen anecdotally is that design system team size is not correlated with company size. So I've worked with teams that are like, we are a 10-person company, we're a startup or funded start, we're a 20-person company, and 10 of our designers are actually working on our design. Half of our company is working on design system right now. And then I've worked with companies that are like, we have thousands and thousands of people and we have 2 people on our design system team, right? So I've seen that run the gamut. Now I don't have a large enough sample size of my own to be able to say like, oh, here's how there's a bell curve here, or there's an average that kind of works out that way. But I've seen some really mismatches that have surprised me, where like, when I go into work with a company that has 10,000 people, I'm like, oh, they probably have a sizable design system team, right? There's only 2 of them, and sometimes when I'm working with a small company, it's like, okay, there's probably going to be one person that's like part-time dedicated to this, and yet they have, 4 people full-time dedicated to it because that's a priority of the company, and they can actually move more nimbly that way by resourcing it that way. So this was surprising to me that it sort of scales proportionally, and maybe that's what happens on the average of the data, but I've certainly been working with the outskirts of that, for sure.
Yeah, and I think like, design systems are so unique to people's organization, their products, that it can really vary, and there's not necessarily like one right answer. Like this is kind of like an average, right? So, but I think what was interesting about team makeup that I found is that, even with younger design systems, they have at least like one content person or one PM. And that like, design teams in general are going, obviously there's going to be a big representation of designers and developers on it, but there are seats at the table now for PM and content, and wanted to get your take on that.
Sorry, on what specifically?
On just like the fact that there are PM and content people on teams now, like established.
I have a chart somewhere. I'll see if I can share it or tweet or something later on. But I have a chart somewhere of what a good multidisciplinary design system team looks like. And the spoiler of that is it looks like any good multidisciplinary product team. Right? We talk a lot about how design systems are products, but I think a lot of people don't really internalize that or what that means. Like, if a design system is a product, you need all of those roles. You need PMs, you need designers, you need engineers, you need managers on that team to help allocate the work. You need business analysts, you need strategists, you need writers, right? So all the things that go into any good product, I think, need to go into a design system. But oddly, we think that design systems are mostly just designers and engineers, and I think because it starts that way, it makes sense. They start that way generally, but as they grow, they need to grow into full-fledged products. They need to have a marketing arm to them, right? They need to have all those things that any good. And so I've started to rephrase that from like design systems or products to like, what if you thought of your design system as a startup? How would you build that as a company? And so, for some teams, that starts to reframe some of that to them. That like, oh yeah, if we were building a company, of course we would need somebody to do marketing, right? Of course we would need somebody to be in charge of growth, right? Of course, we would need somebody to be doing all of these functions that I think we don't necessarily relegate to a design system team. Now, in my chart of here's what a good multidisciplinary team looks like. I share that with teams and they go, okay, like how, this costs $1 million to sustain a team like this. Let's go ask for $1 million. And I'm like, oh, no, this is what a team grows into over 2 or 3 years. This is not just like go and get $1 million of funding and then hire 10 people and then go make your design. Like that seems like a nightmare. Like onboarding would be very difficult. Team culture would be like all of that stuff would be tough because you're building a company. You wouldn't build a company that way. It would be really frenetic. Hopefully you wouldn't build a company that way. It would be really frenetic, right? So I think like that reframing is what I try to say a lot to teams, that like, if you think about this as a company, what are the roles that you need to run a company? And so all of those roles start to have a lot more sense if you think about it that way. If you think about it as a design system, as a project, though, like, oh, it's just a thing that we build and then we use. Wait, why do we need a strategist on that? Why do we need a UX researcher on that team? It doesn't make sense as much. But if you think about it as like, this is a product that's going to live at our company for a long time, then I feel like it makes a lot more sense that way.
Yeah, I love that framing of it being a startup, because usually startup, tends to be like one or two people tinkering with like design or coding, and then you expand, and then you definitely need all the other roles to support it and sustain it. So yeah, very, very true. Um, let's keep moving a little bit. Oh, and then I guess audience, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll start to address those in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to jump to a couple things. Um, let's jump to some meaty things. Let's see, page 49. Um, so this one is about, I'm going to get your take on this one. So documentation is great for truth, onboarding, and confidence. I think this slide is very helpful if you are trying to show a stakeholder, like, hey, we need a design system. This is why this can help us out. But you, on your video, you had an interesting take of like, the single source of truth. Wanted to hear more of that and then see if I had anything to say uh, with that.
So this is my hot take, I guess, and this is certainly an unpopular opinion. Most people that I share this with are like, I totally disagree with that. I'm like, yep, I makes sense, So this is a minority opinion here, I think. I don't believe in single source of truth, is sort of the general hot take. If I'm more nuanced about it, I try to follow, even as a designer and a creative director, like I try to follow Agile. I believe in Agile. I believe in the philosophy of Agile. I don't necessarily believe in a lot of the executions or permutations of it. I think that that's up to the interpretations of teams, but I really believe in the core tenets of Agile, right? So if you read the Agile Manifesto, the one that jumps out most to me as it relates to design systems, and when I teach process and workflow, I always talk about this one, which is working software over comprehensive documentation, right? That's number 2 principle of Agile. So if there is a source of truth to me, it's not the Figma files, it's not the reference site, it's not even the code, but even though that's closer, it is what the customer interacts with. Like that's the source of truth. I've worked on so many design systems and with so many different teams that their design system is beautiful. It's It's pristine. The Figma files are great. The layers are named. The documentation site is beautiful, but it's all aspirational, right? Then you look at the app and you go, where's all that stuff in the app? And they go, oh, well, yeah, it's on the roadmap. It's like, that's cool. It's great to have a roadmap. It's great to have aspirations, but it is not the truth. And so to me, it's not that I'm against the idea of a single source of truth. I'm against the practicality of what we mean by that. Of single source of truth is that if it's aspirational, that's a vision. That's good to have, but it's not actually true. What is true is what's in front of the customer, because the customer is not looking through your reference site. Your customer is not looking at your Figma files and going like, oh yeah, it would be great if that was the case. They are interacting with a thing that helps them, whatever, book a trip or pay a water bill or whatever that thing is. And so to me, single source of truth is misleading. The hot take is I don't believe in one. I believe in multiple sources of truth. But if I'm more nuanced, I think that the software itself, the software that customers interact with, is more the truth than any of the assets that we produce.
Yeah, no, I love that. Now that I've heard you explain that, I'm less upset with you. So I think The idea is like it, I mean, it's true because it's like that's kind of what people see. That's what's active and that's what's there. But I think that also means that, if we do have like Figma files and code and documented libraries and just documentation, if it's not lining up to the product, we as design system makers have some work to do, and work cut out for us to get it to the point that is, matching to what is in the product.
I know you didn't. So for everybody listening, this was not planned. I'm going to plug Zero Height here, not because they asked me to, but because this is what I actually use it for. When I teach teams how to document, one of the things that I use Zero Height for is I try to reframe the idea of documentation to actually make it closer to a single source of truth. Like if we want to use it as that, then let's actually make it the truth. So what does the truth look like? It doesn't look like what we aspire our components to be. It looks like what we do right now. Like, so the word that I use, because I think documentation now has a connotation in terms of design systems, like which generally means technical specs and API docs and things that are important. I don't think we should leave those out. But so I try to change the word, and the word that I use instead of documenting is chronicling. Sometimes I use journaling, right? It's like I ask people on the team, why don't you journal about, or why don't you chronicle what we do as we do it, right? And I give a role to a person on the team. Sometimes I'll take that role where it's like, as we're designing something or building something, I'll just note take, right? I'll chronicle, I'll journal, and I'll do that in Zero Height. And I'll do that in, sometimes in a markdown file, wherever that place is, and I'll just write down, this is what we did. So first thing we did was we opened Figma, and then we opened this library, and then we used this component, and then we changed this thing. And if we document that, and it becomes a little bit more like a case study than it does, a technical spec, then if we put that in our reference site, here's how we made the dashboard. The next time somebody has to make a dashboard, they're actually reflecting something that is true. This is how we made that last dashboard. So this is how you could make a dashboard too. And as those stories get collected, I think that creates a closer source of truth that is documentation, that can be documented, that can be passed along, than what I see people generally do, which is we're going to write what we want this thing to be, right? We're going to write it in advance before we build something, before we make something. We're going to write the spec so that people can do it next time. And I think the source of truth is about what happened last time, not what should happen next, or maybe both. What happened last time and what we want to happen next time. And to me, I don't see a lot of design systems that document like that. If that were the case, I could much more get in line with the fact that that can be a single source of truth for, and I think the important part is for whom? For the next team that is trying to do the same thing. For the next team that's trying to build the dashboard, for the next team that's trying to build that intranet, for the next team that's trying to build, that landing page or whatever it is your design system powers, then they can use that source of truth to actually reflect that.
Yeah, I think that definitely resonates with me because I think, we can write, we can design a dashboard. We have to make a lot of different decisions for the components, the parts, the patterns. And then if we document it and say, this is what you need to use, this is how you use it, do's and don'ts, it doesn't tell you the story of like how people came to that answer and why. So you're kind of almost having to like reverse engineer a complicated pattern to be like, is this going to suit my needs for whatever I need the dashboard for, or my dashboard for? But having that like, chronicled is a good way to kind of see the decision making process, and maybe even guidance of like, if you're running into the situation, turn left or turn right, when it comes to making a decision. So I definitely like that idea. I wonder if anyone else has tried like chronicling, or will want to try the chronicling approach for later.
Everybody does, please send us some links afterwards, or talk to us about it afterward, because I think there's not enough examples of this. So everybody looks at the big popular design systems and goes, oh, we'll do ours like that, we'll do ours like Material, we'll do ours like Polaris, we'll do ours like Salesforce, like all these great companies that have great design systems, but you don't know that works for you or your users, right? We don't even know if that works for their users, right? Like all we know is what we see, and so we don't know if those things are good. So if we are writing for our own users, then we can much more, with much higher confidence, we can say, yeah, this is a thing that they actually need. And I love how you put it, Michelle, that like where people get tripped up with documentation is they don't understand the decision-making process. They only see the instructions. So they go, well, these instructions don't work for me because I'm not doing exactly the same thing that you were doing. I'm doing something slightly different, but I don't know how you arrived at that conclusion. So either I follow your directions and they're 100% correct, or they're not, and I'm left on my own. I think if we expose that decision-making process a lot more, then at least people don't, even if they can't follow the directions exactly, they at least go, I know how you got to that, so we can make an equivalent decision that works for us. And I think that's the kind of stuff that doesn't come through oftentimes in design system documentation.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely now like really curious and I want to try this approach to like yeah, help people rather than doing that guessing game. And then I wanted to touch um from this slide and the slide before about different statistics about design systems bringing consistency, speed, and efficiency. In your video, you mentioned that these are kind of like very high level findings and that you were looking for some like more substantial or like further like a drill down of some more um like some more takeaways that were more solid and more robust than kind of like I think as design system makers we kind of get all of this. So I would say like it's almost like this information is helpful for people maybe who aren't very familiar with design systems and need to have a better understanding. But as design system makers, like what kind of things do you think would be really helpful for us to see if we were to like dive deeper into more data or more knowledge and statistics?
So to me, there's two or three things that I want to mention here. One is there's a thing called Goodhart's law, and Goodhart's law says something like when a measure becomes a target, it's no longer a good measure. Right? And I think that in design system culture, right, I think I can say that now. We've been talking about it for years now. You know, all of us and who are interested and understand that design systems are important. A lot of times we make adoption the target. Right? It's not just a measurement; it's now the target. What's the number one? You know, the number one metric for design systems? Adoption. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's a good thing, but adoption should be a side effect, or adoption should be a byproduct, or at least a leading or a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator of design system success. So all of these to me, you know, I'm not knocking any of these. I think they are table stakes, and I think we need to go deeper than that. And I think because of that, because people point at these, and because they're the first set of metrics that we focus on, I think understandably, then they become targets, and then I think design system teams stop at those things. And it's like, no, that's where we should start. That's not where we should stop. So one example that I like to use a lot that I think makes sense, and I think it's clear, is I look at retention as a metric. Because that is a leading indicator. You know, if we look at people who have used the design system versus not used the design system at any given company or team, and can we make a correlation between the fact that people who use the design system actually stick around longer? Like, to me, that is a measure of success that's worth tracking. It becomes like one of those like key success, you know, KPIs or OKRs or whatever, you know, that really show that your design system is having an impact. I think one of the things that, you know, and this is my last soapbox, I think, here is like one of the gripes that I have with design system culture is that I think we're in love with the work and not the outcome of the work. So design system teams are proud of the fact that they've created a design system and then stop there. Right. So like, I think we should be proud of the fact that we created good design systems, but that's not where we stop. You know, that's where we should start, because design systems are supposed to be for something. They're supposed to help people pay their water bills. They're supposed to help people book a trip. They're supposed to help people do something. And it's tough because we're indirectly removed from that, right? The product designers and the product engineers are the ones that are helping people book the trip. We're creating tools for them to help other people, right? So we're one layer removed from that, which is why our metric is shallow. Our metric is, as long as designers and developers know how to use our components, as long as they adopt it, well, it's on them to figure out how it works with their users. And I think that we need to go deeper than that. I think that we need to be more involved in how does our tool help our user do something for their user. I think we need to be involved in that conversation. And I know, you know, it mixes chocolate and peanut butter, you know, and a lot of people aren't happy with that. But I think we need to go there. Otherwise, we're so disconnected from what our product is supposed to do that it's easy for us to just be shallow about it. It's easy for us to go, well, I did my job. You know, I don't know what happens on the other end. So, you know, I love looking at things that are a little bit deeper, you know, looking at retention, looking at things like tying design system goals to product goals or to organizational goals. So, if you work at Airbnb and your goal for the company is to help people book trips, well, then the design system goal has to be somehow related to helping people book trips, not just adoption of components, but how do our components help people book trips? I don't see that conversation happening a lot. And so, this is my way of old man yelling at cloud and getting people to focus on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very important because I think that's the one way to get traction for your design system is to tie it to the success of a product or lack of success for a product to then justify, okay, we need to put resources toward this, we need to invest in the design system. And I think, retention, as someone who was a hiring manager before, like I know that like if my design system team, they don't have a design system, or if the designers don't have a design system, they're just going to look for a job that has a design system, and use that, because wouldn't you want that as your as part of your workflow? But yeah, I think you also bring up a really good point that like we are so focused on the actual like making of the components and stuff, but not necessarily like the actual users. Like we're kind of thinking about, like we're skipping the actual direct users, thinking about the end customers. But I think there's a whole world, and I think that opens up a lot of opportunity for people in design ops roles to help with, shepherding design systems being used across the country or company, for sure. All right. So we only have like a couple minutes left. I wanted to leave some time to answer some questions that the audience asked. Um, okay, so Yan Yan Tayson, or maybe Jan Jan Tayson, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, has asked, how do you calculate adoption and retention? Is it through file usage or consistency in product versus design file?
One, and there's a lot of comments in the chat there that are like, sounds good in theory. How do we do it in practice? So, all of the stuff that I'm saying is like easier said than done, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth doing, right? It just means it's going to be hard to do. Design system work is hard. That's why it's valuable, is because it's difficult work that actually leads to a lot of value. That's why we can say things like, our design system saved millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of hours, and like things that are astronomical numbers. So anyway, I'm dodging the question. How do you calculate adoption and retention? Well, adoption is tough to track it now, partly because tooling in our space is immature. We are only now getting tools that start to do that, but all of the teams that I've worked with or seen have built custom homegrown tools to track adoption. So that can be something as automated as using tools like React Scanner, for example, that you can hook into your repo that see how many people have consumed your components. The same thing exists on the Figma side, if you're doing that with your design assets and your design files and things like that. So there are tools like that that can help track adoption. Right now, a lot of teams have to build them, homegrown. I know Zeppelin came out with a product recently called Omelet that actually helps track some of that stuff. It's very early. I think it's in public beta and right now or something like that. I imagine more tools like that will be coming out soon. So there are tools that are coming out to help track adoption. Retention is even tougher, partly because it's no longer a technical thing. Like, who generally tracks retention at a company? Not the engineers, not people working in GitHub. It's usually the HR department, or something like that. So the first step in tracking retention or things like that would be to then partner with your HR department, or partner with design ops, or partner with your ops groups, because they might be the ones who already have metrics in place to track retention. I wouldn't suggest reinventing those things, because that's not, again, it's one of those things. It's like, now I have to take on even more work to help track this stuff. So that partnering is a really good way to do that, because likely there's somebody else at your company that is already tracking that stuff, and they might already have tools that are in place for that. So you might be able to hook into those tools, or at least have some sort of shared sessions or shared data with those kinds of teams. So design ops, product ops, DevOps, maybe less DevOps, HR, teams like that, who are generally tracking some of those things. A lot of those things are tracked qualitatively too. So it's not, plug this thing in here and watch a dashboard populate. A lot of them is, regular employee surveys, conversations with employees, exit surveys, like things like that, that you can actually tie design system questions or design system topics into some of those things. So that's where I would start, is partnering with those kinds of teams at your organization. What do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the thing is like it's almost like we don't know to ask for these things. So we just need to like be more proactive and say like what data can I like what are some ideas and outcomes that I want to like that I have as a hypothesis. And then kind of work backwards to kind of because all those like things that you mentioned are in place, like the like DevOps might have some tools in place to track, various code things. As well as like HR has all those like surveys and interviews, like where can we um, assert ourselves to get some more of the information? Because we do have to work a little bit harder to kind of get some of that data for sure. And I
Quick
think,
thing
yeah,
about
if,
that.
yeah,
Thing I've suggested to lots of teams I've worked with, and no one has ever taken me up on it, so I want to share it more wider than this, is track vacation, track holidays that people go on, and try to make a correlation for the fact that either your design system team or people who use the design system are actually better rested and have better mental health than others, in the company as a model, to spread. So I've, even just building a Google Doc spreadsheet of vacation trackers, like here are the people that went on holiday because we could do that. We could take time off because we are being more efficient, because we are being more consistent, in the tools that we have. The other thing related to that is you can start to, if you don't have anything to track that, and if that's abnormal culturally, you can actually start to change your culture around that. One of my friends, Cameron Mall, when he worked at a company a few years ago, he instituted at his company a minimum vacation policy where people were forced to take at least 2 days of vacation or holiday a month, because people don't use those things. And so, you can help change and model culture by doing those kinds of things, even if on your team. It doesn't have to be company wide. Even just doing it yourself and leading by example. And again, that's one of those things that are close to retention. It's not about adoption. It's not about component usage or anything like that, but it's making the case for how your design system is helping your company. So I think those are the kinds of things that we don't talk about as much as an industry, that I would love to see a lot more of.
yeah, I think for sure because I think knowing like being able to track some of those things can lead to a lot more meaning than just yay we have a design system, we check that box. um and it could spur a lot of questions. So like if there are existing like team surveys that your team does, just to get a gut check, maybe there's design system questions added in there, like are you happy with the design system, yes or no, like, and as a like a way to kind of gauge whether if someone wants to stay or not, right? So we might not get the actual facts, like I quit this job because there was no design system, but get a sense for the vibe and how people are feeling and how impactful a design system can be to a team, um, for sure. We are like almost at time, but like I wanted to jump to a question that Debbie had asked. She is a user researcher, UX researcher on a design system team. Surprised it didn't make the list. Is it quite unique to have a user researcher on a design system team? So
But
let me.
Michelle, I imagine you have a lot of thoughts about this as well. Actually, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I think like, job titles, uh, this is like mostly designers, and then, engineers, others, and most of the others were actually people who had hybrid roles for design and engineer. I think you know, UX research is always something that design system teams would love to have. And when I was at my previous company, we did have a user researcher team, but they were spread so thin amongst supporting all the other products that they couldn't be involved. Like I invited them and they were like, thank you for thinking of us. We appreciate that, but we're spread so thin. So we can't be involved as much as we want to. Um, and then so the way we ended up working in design system research was just as they were doing other usability tests, we would throw in new components and test that. That's kind of how we worked it. So we didn't have dedicated UX research. Yeah, so Dan, what are your thoughts and experiences?
Think it's a lot more optimistic than mine. Mine's a bit more pessimistic, which is that I think this goes back to a thing that I was saying earlier about, like, people don't actually think of design systems as products. If they did, UX researcher would be a no-brainer. But they think of it as like, no, it's like a Figma file, right? Or it's a code repository.
Yeah, it's for
Why would I
engineers.
usability? So whenever I mention the word usability test to a team, they go, usability test. what do you mean usability? You don't usability test a Figma file. And that's true. You don't usability test a Figma file, but you do usability test a product, right? You like it makes sense to usability test. So I think we have to change people's minds about the fact that design systems actually are products, like, and really let that sink in and what that means. If it's a product, it needs to be tested with users, right? How would we know if it works? Usability testing, UX research, like all of those kinds of things make more sense, but they have to make sense within a context. I think we as an industry have to do a better job of setting that context, and not just paying lip service to like, hey, a design system is a product, but then really just treating it like a Figma file or treating it like it's just a code library, right? It's just a component library. I think until that happens, I don't think we're going to see some of those other roles outside of design and engineering, and outside of practitioner tactical roles. I think we're just going to see a barrier to people going, why would we have a copywriter on this team? Like, why does our Figma file need a copywriter? And that, I think, reveals the fact that people aren't really thinking about it as a product yet.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it's like been 10 years since atomic design first came on the scene, and like it's almost like we've been having these same struggles for the past 10 years, right? So like we need to all as a collective acknowledge that we need to really, anchor ourselves as a legit thing. And I think, people are coming on board with that, especially with like all the job titles that we see. Um, and that some teams do have the resourcing. So I see a lot of people in the chat saying that they're testing their Figma libraries, which is really awesome. So I think it's just like one of those things that we all just need to collectively get there and anchor this as like a legit thing, to then keep moving forward. So I think if everyone's doing, or people are doing usability testing, and there are UX researchers on the team, like you're setting the standard and the path where we all need to follow. We
Please share
are,
that stuff.
yes,
Post it
yes.
on LinkedIn, share Twitter video, like all of that stuff, because I think the world needs to see more of that stuff. So yeah, if you're all doing it, awesome. But please share that stuff so that more of us can do it too.
For sure. And I think that also helps. And this is kind of why the report exists, is that so people can take it to their other teams to share this information. The more that we can share, the better we can help our other fellow design system makers. We are definitely over time, but I wanted to quickly wrap up and just say thank you so much, Dan, for joining me in this really fun conversation. We didn't get to everyone's questions, so we probably will put the questions in our Zero Slack channel and then follow up with answers there. But if you know, definitely check out Dan's video if you haven't seen it. We will send out a link to this recording as well as some links to other resources. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Michelle, thank you. This is an awesome conversation. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah, for sure. We have lots more to talk about. So, all right. I'll talk to you all later. Thank you again for joining. Thanks, Dan.
Bye.